So funny enough, this ongoing pretend feud that we're supposed to be angry at Americans because of Donald Trump's tariffs. At the same time, Americans are being told to be angry at Canada because Canada's taking advantage of America. The whole psyops, the whole elbows up, BS. It's really a mask off moment when you see behind the scenes while they're spewing this garbage. And just to remind people of how phony and fake all this is. Remember this statement that came from Mark Carney? That he said that Canada and the U.S. relationship has ended. Remember when he said this? Says we know that the decades-long process of our ever closer economic relationship between Canada and the United States has ended. So he's talking about we're no longer going to do trade deals with the United States. And that was part of his whole elbows up initiative. That's how he fomented the discord to get himself selected to become prime minister, how he was going to be a savior against Donald Trump. And turns out that was a complete phony flaw. That was completely fabricated. It was a psyop to trick people because Carney knows that this trade war is theatrics. They could have resolved this on day one. But they kept this going and still continuing because somehow this psyop is working in favor of this insidious liberal government. Just like how it's working in favor of the Trump administration, even though the Trump administration is losing mass amounts of approval. But here, listen to what Mark Carney said about ending the relation.
This is an important day for Canada's workers. Look, we know the world's changing. We know that this decades-long process of our ever closer economic relationship between Canada and the United States has ended. And as a consequence of that, many of our strengths have become our vulnerabilities, particularly in those industries that are most tightly integrated with the United States. Headline, last year, 75% of our exports went to the U.S. 90% of our lumber exports went to the U.S. 90% of our aluminum exports went to the United States. 90% of our steel exports went there, all bound for a single market that has changed.
But we're going to give all that up because I want people to be angry at Donald Trump and not be angry about this central banker monster that's going to bleed this country dry and pretend to go on fake trips to get trade deals with other countries that have nothing to do with us. It was all a psyop from the get-go to get this guy installed as prime minister. This guy that pretended to be the savior against all the problems created by the liberal establishment is still fomenting the same problems done by the liberal establishment. So him saying that, the relationship is over between the United States has caused nothing but problems. He's been down to Washington. He's doing all these phony deals with Trump, which result in nothing. He keeps coming back short and saying, well, we're still talking. Almost a year into this, because when did he announce the tariffs? It was back in November of 24, wasn't it? That's when the first announcement came about. And nothing has come about of this. And in fact, it's just an absolute worse. It's gone absolute worse. So while he's saying that the relationship between Canada and the United States is over, surprisingly, behind closed doors, it looks like it's business as usual in certain aspects. So this is CTV News saying ICE. That's the Immigration Customs Enforcement. That's the mass strangers that are beating up people in metropolitan areas who don't have badges, who don't have any ways to identify them, which if you're part of law enforcement, you're required to have some sort of identification. Police officers have badges. They have name tags. Even security guards at the mall have identification. But it's okay if a guy in a wife beater and jeans can go and beat up someone in their car in downtown Chicago. That's considered law enforcement according to the United States. But that's another story for another day. We can get into all sorts of detail on that, but this is amazing. So at the time that Mark Carney is saying that the United States and Canada no longer have this relationship, ICE is ordering a fleet of 20 armored vehicles from a Canadian firm. So while jobs are being displaced and industries are shutting down, the auto sector is collapsing, the steel industry is collapsing, many other industries in this country is collapsing. It's good to know that, manufacturing weapons of war to terrorize people is still increasing. In fact, they had to get an economics advisor to run to the Globe and Mail to tell them that, hey, if we lose the automotive and energy sectors in this country, it's not a problem because people can build missiles. Literally, they had to write an entire article about the upside of the country collapsing, because then those people will be manufacturing a bunch of missiles so we can go bomb and destroy and kill off other people. Yay! That's so wonderful for a peacekeeping nation. So wonderful. So, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement embarked millions of dollars for a bulk order of 20 armored vehicles from Canadian defense manufacturer Roshel that are built to resist bullets and bomb blasts. U.S. government procurement records show the department laying out plans for such a rush order worth the equivalent of about $10 million Canadian for 20 Senator Stang emergency response tactical vehicles to roam the streets of U.S. towns and cities to go and attack civilians. And people are going to say, well, but they're going after the terrorists. They're going after the creeps. They're going after the criminals. They're going after this. Are they? Because 99.9% of the records that we're seeing are innocent people they suspect of being criminals. Suspect. They have no records. They have no jurisdiction. Again, they could just go to the local policing and take the people that are in jail, but they're not doing that. They want to beat up people on the streets to fearmonger and to scare them into complicity. So that eventually, once we kick out the illegals that are apparently making so much crime and ruckus in our communities, then they'll start going after Americans. Because, hey, why not? We have all this power. We have all this unchecked unaccountability. Let's abuse more people. Let's send Americans, let's send poor people to alligator Alcatraz and turn them into slaves. Great job. Really a mega persona. Go after your own. The justification for the sole score order was published in partially redacted document on a U.S. federal procurement website on November 26th, and the site says a contract was awarded on November 28th. The procurement document declares only Roshel, I keep saying Rochelle, I think it's Roshel, because it's not E-L-L-E, but anyway, which is headquartered in Brampton, Ontario, meets the department's requirements for the vehicles needed to support agents in the field and can complete the order within 30 days. Roshel is uniquely positioned to fulfill this requirement within the necessary time frame, having confirmed immediate availability of vehicles that fully meet ICE specifications. Said the document produced by ICE's Office of Acquisition Management. So, kind of hilarious. It's kind of hilarious because if anyone knows about Brampton, it's primarily a town of migrants. And I'm not, that's not to make a race point, but Brampton is known for a lot of immigration to be brought into the country and being located primarily in that region. And we know a lot of these companies will definitely abuse the power of temporary foreign workers and whatnot to bring in these migrants to work at their companies for cheaper wages. So isn't it kind of ironic that you have a company that's manufacturing defense for the United States for ICE that's going after migrants that's being produced by migrants. Think about that. Think of how ironic that is. You have a bunch of migrants in Brampton manufacturing these armored tanks to be sold to the United States so the United States can go and decimate their migrants. And possibly ours. Because let's face it, what happens in America tends to come up here. And what happens in the UK tends to happen over here. Because this is globalism, ladies and gentlemen. This is not just Trump. This is not just the GOP. This is going to happen around the world. Around the world, they're going to try and amp up because they want a massive police state. It's not about tracking down migrants, not about immigration, because these are the same ghoulish monsters that allowed for this problem. They allowed for the unchecked migration of so many people, and then they claim, "Oh, we got the solution to this problem. We're going to start beating up people on the streets of downtown Chicago and Boston, New York, and Los Angeles. We're going to roam the streets and scare people into submission. That's how we're going to solve immigration." The absurdity of this. While other sources were consulted, they had limited quantities available, or none could fulfill the entire requirement within the record period of performance, nor meet all technical requirements. The purchase was first reported by the UK-based newspaper, The Independent. Roshel has said it has sent hundreds of Senator vehicles to Ukraine in its ongoing war against Russia. Although it makes different types, company marketing materials state the emergency response vehicle's floor is outfitted with blast protection. The department, commonly known as ICE, is awash in controversy and allegations of human rights abuses as U.S. President Donald Trump pursues a campaign to expel vast number of immigrants residing in the country illegally. Again, you can't write better irony than this. So you're getting a factory with migrant workers to create armored vehicles to then sell to the United States so they can crack down on migrants. Do you see how absurd all this is? Do you see how absurd all this is? Just like they're the same company that's selling these armored vehicles just prior to this to a bunch of neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And yet I'm supposed to be lectured about anti-Semitism. I'm supposed to be lectured about, stopping hate on the streets. This is a peacekeeping nation, damn it. And we're selling armored vehicles to a bunch of neo-Nazi thugs to beat up their own civilians. How do you think I'm going to feel? How do you think I'm going to feel? How do you think Canadians are going to feel that their tax dollars are also subsidizing this to keep this afloat? That they have to get a bunch of phony economic experts and advisors to run to publications and say how great idea this is. You know, for those who can't make cars because we undermined the auto industry, because we undermined the energy industry, because everything is going amok, we'll just create missiles. We'll create missiles. We'll create, tanks. We'll create all this weapons of war, the mass destruction. Because let's face it, you're all going to be dead anyway. We might as well just, fast track it. That's how ghoulish these people are. That's how ghoulish these monsters think. And once AI takes over, they're going to make it even worse. Because you're going to become that useless eater that the World Economic Forum has already identified you with. They're not going to need you. They're not going to need labor. They're not going to need people on this planet. That's why they're okay with this. They're okay with, ramping up warfare. They're okay with mass slaughter. They're okay with possible nuclear annihilation. They're okay with all this. Unbelievable. The order comes despite Trump's America First trade policy as he pursues a protracted trade war to poach jobs and plants from the Canadian steel, manufacturing, and automotive sectors. The department turned its nose up at other U.S.-based heavy vehicle manufacturers, saying Alpine Armoured Company, how do you say that? Site Armoured Inc., DGM LLC, and Lenco Armored Vehicles did not meet all the requirements or timeline. Delaying this procurement to pursue a fully competitive action would significantly impact operational readiness and hinder ICE's ability to deploy mission-critical resources in a timely manner, the procurement document says. Roshel, Global Affairs Canada, and ICE did not immediately reply to requests for comment on Tuesday. Of course not. Of course not. Why would we ever hold these people accountable? Why would we ever do that? Just let this happen. Just let it happen. Shut up. Get back in the line. Don't ask questions. So, here's this account here, World Beyond War Canada, where they said, this is outrageous. Brampton Arms Company Roshel was just contracted to send a rush order of armored vehicles to ICE. There is absolutely no justification for Canada to approve such an order. But this is exactly how Canada's arms export regime works. Exactly. Exactly. Just like we showed you about how people were freaked out that Mark Carney recognized Palestine as a state, saying you're rewarding terrorism. At the same time, they're still sending massive weapons to Israel. At the same goddamn time. So all the people that were worried about that, I hope you realize you have eggs all over your face. Because they're doing this behind closed doors. They're screwing you over. They're lying to you. They're a bunch of hypocrites. And this is what you get. And eventually, I hate to admit to this, but eventually, what actions happen in the United States with ICE is probably going to come here. No doubt it's going to come here. They're already trying to mass up the droves of, criminal activities like speech. Oh, you have to be arrested because of a post you made on social media. Well, we need to build bigger jail facilities. Well, we need to get bigger law enforcement. We got to make a massive police state. Exactly what they're doing in the United States. They want to bring it to Canada. They want to bring it to the UK. It's going to happen all around the world because this is globalization. This is the globalist agenda. You will own nothing. You will like it. You will live in a police state and you become a slave. And it doesn't matter if it's Trump, Carney, Keir Starmer, whoever's in control, they are going to serve the heinous oligarchical monsters that run this damn planet. That's why they're doing this. This is the military-industrial complex in action. This is the stuff they warned you about in the 60s. And here we are today, a peaceful nation, the nation that refused to go into Vietnam and refused to invade Iraq in the early 2000s. Now we're making armored vehicles to crack down on migrants in another country. Made by migrants. Just how hysterical that is. How hysterical that is. But, the U.S. Canada and the U.S. relationship is over. That's why we can't have trade deals. That's why we can't resolve this issue. And why, at the same time, a steel mill in Northern Ontario issues layoff notices to 1,000 workers. Algoma Steel received $500 million in government loans to protect it from U.S. tariffs. So a steel mill that makes domestic products has to close down, even with government subsidies attached to this to keep this manufacturing afloat. They're going to shut down, take the money and run. And the Canadian government's going to say, well, that's fine because now we're going to be manufacturing a bunch of armored ICE vehicles for the United States. Just like we manufactured a bunch of weapons of destruction for Ukraine and Israel. And we're not going to be making anything, which is screwing the country even more. So here's table salt saying, breaking bombshell. The government of Canada knew that 1,000 workers were going to be laid off before it loaned to Algoma Steel for $400 million. So they knew That company was going to lay off people. They knew. And they still got the money and they took it and ran. To convert blast furnaces to electric furnaces. So, domestic products. They're shutting down that while patting themselves on the back that we can create weapons of mass destruction to destroy other countries. Just how insidious this is. So here, this is Bash Capello's interviewing the guy from Algoma steel mill. And listen to this. Listen just how hypocritical all this.
Loans in order to protect Canadian jobs. Did the governments know that these layoffs were in the cards before they agreed to these loans to your company?
Well, I think the government certainly knows our business strategy. It knows the pivot that we had to make. It knew very well that the extreme pressure the company was under. I don't think anybody would loan the company $500 million without asking very detailed questions about what our business plan was. I think the core concern.
Oh, of course. The government would never just give out money without actual accountability. It's not like they would, ask the CBC how they're, still doing journalism when they gave them billions of dollars in a lendo. It's not like they would ask these, media tycoons that, hey, are you going to make sure your workers still stay afloat? Of course not. They took the money and ran. And you get a bunch of people now laid off at the bottom from this corporate malfeasance. And once again, it screws the country. But the government and the corporations do not care. They're aligned together to create this technocratic fascism that's going to destroy every single one of us. And while people are, miffed and angry about cultural and woke and identity politics, which you can be angry about. I'm not saying that's totally discredited, but that's minuscule to all this that's happening right now, because this affects every single one of us, regardless of your skin color, your ethnicity, your religion, your orientation, no matter who you are in this world.
Is how do we protect the ongoing Algoma steel? How do we make sure this company is competitive, is viable? What's the technology you're going to use? How are you going to make steel? And the jobs associated with that are an output of that. If we're making steel with an EAF steel making platform, that requires a certain amount of jobs, and we've been very clear about how many jobs that requires. If we're making steel with blast furnace and coke ovens, that's a different number of jobs, but we aren't going to operate that way. So we're shutting those assets down, and that's what's driving the adjustment of employment. I would love to say that I can get more competitive, make more steel, make it cheaper, and make it with more employees so that there's more jobs involved. But that's just not the configuration we're moving towards. And we've been very open with that, both with the government and with our own employees.
Of course not. We could actually do something to invest into our country and make things prosperous, but no, of course not. The best way to make ourselves less shitty is to manufacture and deploy weapons of warfare and turn other countries even shittier. So then we can just look at, places like Ukraine that's a total ruckus right now and say, well, it's bad in Canada, but it's worse over there. So, you better thank and kiss the ass of Mark Carney, because it could be a lot worse. Wow. So, while domestic companies are being destroyed and siphoned out of the country from a central bank goon like Mark Carney, again, they're going to congratulate themselves on the back because, we got, a $10 million deal from ICE to build a bunch of armored tanks to deploy and destroy migrants that are being created by migrants, nonetheless. You can't make this hypocrisy more funnier than it sounds. Can't write this up, folks. How despairable this country has gone. But of course, there's going to be some, top bigwig that are going to go on to the Globe and Mail. They're going to go onto BNN. They're going to go onto these business networks and say, well, we're going to lose all these jobs at the auto sector and we can't create vehicles or furnaces or VCR or, microwaves and stuff like that. Then, I guess we should invest more into war. I guess this peacekeeping nation needs to invest more into war and do more destruction and be part of the problem and put blood even further onto our hands. Because that's how you make progress, apparently, is destroy the rest of the world. The billionaires, the capitalists laugh themselves to the bank, and the entire working class just gets even more deprived. Yay.